Welcome to the Great Security Debate. This show has experts taking sides to help broaden understanding of a topic. Therefore, it's safe to say that the views expressed are not necessarily those of the people we work with or for. Heck, they may not even represent our own views as we take a position for the sake of the debate. Our website is greatsecurity.debate.net, and you can contact us via email at feedback@greatsecurity.debate.net or on Twitter @SecurityDebate. Now, let's join the debate already in progress.
If we take the honesty angle, didn't I see something you posted on Twitter recently, Dan, about, I think it was YouTube, about a button reporting certain videos or something that it really didn't work?
No, this was about the recommendations. So, but similar. I mean, it's when you try and shape the recommendations you get, when you say, I'm not interested in this video, it doesn't actually materially change.
Yeah.
So it's different, but same kind of, placebo.
How often do you guys use Brave and DuckDuckGo versus, say, like Chrome and Google?
I only use DuckDuckGo.
Right. So I find myself sometimes falling back to Google to search about certain landscaping plants and everything else because it knows where I live, etc. So it pulls up Michigan plants.
I don't. Yeah.
But
I'd rather just add more search criteria.
Well, that's what I was going to say. This goes back to training. Think about a generational change here. I do understand what things need to be typed in to search for, and this goes back to 7 years ago when they were teaching, how do you get more granular with your search to find what it is you're looking for, right? It's not about typing in a sentence. It's about typing in the 7 key words. And now people are so used to just typing in 3 things and it pulls up everything they want to see within 30 minutes of them, right? There's that huge shift in change in all the signals. And hate to say it, the company I work for is very good at using signal intelligence, right? That comes from a certain stack. But this is what these companies have grown into. Ad tech has become so powerful.
So now that we turn this into search engines anonymous, I gotta confess, I'm still an avid Chrome user on everything I do. So,
oh, that's fine. It's a decision. It is.
It works. Going in fully acknowledging that everything I do is tracked. It's
funny because you going in acknowledging that everything's fully tracked. You're like, am I doing anything bad? No, but there is a lot of data out there that's gathered about Erik. Now think about the people that even outside of this conversation are in everything they do, the idea of cookies, accept, don't accept. It's they have everything. It's there's people that literally have given up and it's well, all my information is going to be found somewhere. Somebody probably has all my passwords. I'm not too worried about it.
It's anymore. Unfortunate too. I mean, how many of us have had to have the conversation with certain people? How did they find my phone call? How did they, do a spoof call to me and all this stuff, and trying to explain to them how much information is really out there. I mean, heck, if we go back to the Cambridge Analytica, what went on with that? It's incredible what can be done with that data. And this really goes back to the conversation we've had before on just because we can doesn't mean we should.
Think about all the things you sign up for. They have an asterisk for the fields you have to fill out. Yeah. Email and phone number are always there along with address, right? If you're paying for something. I was going to make a point. I almost forgot what it was. Throwing out some statistic numbers, because already going into 2023, we're seeing that the 2022 numbers from an email compromise standpoint, from a business side, have been around almost $3 billion. But it's the consumer part that blows me out of the water. Over $6 billion, right? So you're taking now what's become an $8 to $9 billion industry, but the majority of the people, it's not that businesses aren't being hurt. That's a big number for businesses.
Right.
But at the end of the day, the consumers, right? The mom and pop shops, the you and me, the people going after your livelihood. And it reminds me reminiscent of going back to automotive when we used to say, if it makes sense, it makes money. If you could get a 1 penny increase on every weld, and there's 30 welds per seat, and there's 4 seats in the vehicle, you are going to make an additional, $1.20 to $1.60 per seat per vehicle. And if you're building 40,000 vehicles a month, that's $40,000 times a year. You just brought in over $1 million on a penny, because if it makes sense, it makes money. Same thing here. You have X number of consumers out there, and if the organizations are getting their holes to become less and less and less as entry points, right? Security organizations are becoming, or I shouldn't say security, enterprise organizations are becoming more mature. It's getting harder and harder to get in. So the level of entry is greater. So if you're going to use social engineering, you can put something out there that works in a given population. Now you can just buy data on different subgroups, right? Like data analytica, you could break it down to 20 different classifications of people and target all of them.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of the end of my rant there. It's like, poor consumers.
Well, that's
as I step off my soapbox. Hold on.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I'm like, all right, so what we're doing is we're fixing it at work, and then we're screwing ourselves at home.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's
which means wait, hold on. I think I'd rather invest my time in fixing it work, because you know what happens next. Then you get the family calls. I got a rogue email and now it's spamming everybody. Can you help me? And then now we're all tech support for all of our families, more so than normal. And that's a job you can't quietly quit.
No, there's no getting away from that. Oh, you're in IT. Yeah, no, I'm in security. No, you fix computers, right?
You use a keyboard. You're in technology.
And not to deviate to something really cool, but somebody posted a picture the other day and was talking about how a friend asked him, like, do you like your job? And he's like, yeah. He's like, I work in security. And they're like, yeah, but I couldn't sit around at a desk all day in an office. And he goes, are you kidding? And he took a picture, and he's out in the middle of beautiful woods with mountains all around him at this dam, running a live, penetration test, but like physical, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, are you kidding? This is my office, man. It's beautiful out here. Where are you? Right. And he's in a city
that can be anybody's office.
Yeah, exactly. So I thought that was really cool. But on the flip side, going back to the privacy standpoint and all the different data points and everything else that's out there, like when you talk about consumer, not just business privacy, because I think this conversation started with Sephora and the fine that they were levied against because of California privacy law. And California is starting to take a bigger and bigger stance on what privacy means for the consumer, for the individual, right? It's reminiscent of GDPR. But the amount of data that's out there, and you guys as practitioners know that even people that post things that show that they're away from their home or they're on vacation, right? If you're on a social media platform, we talked about this 2.5, 3 years ago. Like, I can tell you, even the data points that were available back then were like, sub 40,000. Today, it's in excess of 70,000 different signal intelligence and data available on you. So it's like,
yeah,
Dan eats his Cheerios first and then drinks his orange juice. Erik drinks his orange juice first, then eats his Cheerios. Yeah, right. So you got all that kind of data.
It still always amazes me, the whole, I'm going to post it, I'm going on a trip or something like that. I'm just thinking about, like, manifest this in the physical world. And I'm looking outside right now. Like, if I was to run through the streets, hey, just letting everybody know I'm going on a trip. My house is going to be wide open for this week during this time. Nobody's watching or anything going on. Come on. But we're kind of
okay.
trained.
You're posting it to TripIt, and then TripIt sells it to somebody.
Yeah, it's true. So kind of thinking through this from a philosophical standpoint, I know historically we've always looked at businesses from the lens of maximizing shareholder value. Is privacy kind of the photo negative of that? That no, you should actually be fixed and focused on the consumer first, and because you're focused on the consumer and excellence there. Therefore, that will in turn help you maximize shareholder value. Kind of the whole idea of that consumers vote with their wallets, right? And if you focus on the consumer, therefore, so think about Patagonia, right? I think that's a perfect example that you take a company that knew who they were and took, I would argue, one of the biggest moves we've ever seen in corporate America and making the transition of giving the company to as kind of a philanthropic play. Yeah. Are the old adage of shareholder value and privacy at odds?
No, I don't think they are at odds, because I think they're very much in support of each other. The idea that
people are allowed to care about themselves and make purchasing decisions. It means, and it means that we all have to be better as companies at supporting that. ESG, the environmental, social, and governance space, is growing. Why is it growing? Because people who buy care are caring more and making buying decisions that align with that. And I think that privacy and responsible use of information falls right within that. You guys have both heard me talk about security as a competitive advantage. Heck, we even did an episode on should you use security as a competitive advantage. Global search and replace the word security, put privacy in there, and it's the same argument for that level of transparency. Doing it well and then telling people exactly what you're doing and letting them make the choice is absolutely supportive of that ESG notion. It's also supportive of empowering consumers, the buyers, the end users, to make decisions that make sense. And in the middle, even if you're in B2B worlds, I spent this last week at the Rocky Mountain Information Security Conference out in Denver, which, by the way, if you are a security practitioner, privacy practitioner, is an entire privacy day. Take a look, rmisc.org. I'll put the link in the show notes. It'll be 12 months from now, but wow, is it a great conference. The idea that even in the B2B world, this came up a lot because we're talking about consumers in this privacy day. But the idea that business to business, even the business I sell to, has consumers. And so this kind of trickle down, pass through privacy and caring about these things is important. And we're going to see this in new legislation, the way legislation goes through. We're going to continue to see that requirement.
Yeah.
Hey, Dan, can I ask you guys both a question?
No.
Can you explain to the listeners?
That was your question. Can I ask?
Yeah.
Oh, can you guys both explain what is in 20 words or less? Dan, what is the dark web?
I've never answered anything in 20 words or less.
I know this is going to be tough.
What is the
That's why I put it on you guys and not me.
That's not the question I expected.
Yeah, I didn't see that coming.
And there's a reason why I'm going there. Erik, 20 words or less. What is the dark web?
You knew I couldn't do it.
A carve out of the internet where anything goes.
Interesting.
I call it a subspace.
Yes.
It's there's the internet and then there's the hidden part of it. That is.
And which is greater, the dark web in terms of volume or the web that most consumers know? It's like space, the greatest frontier. Like you look out there and it's just this dark.
Which part of infinite is bigger? Which infinite space is bigger? Right.
So the reason I'm going there is like,
they're both big.
This goes back to what when you were talking about privacy and security and how it can be when I say a hindrance, lack of that can actually impact your brand. You mentioned now, but also understand
lack of it and presence of it can impact your brand.
So where people get their information though, right? And what they believe. And this goes back to marketing in North America. And this goes back to social media in North America. Like when people were posting the LinkedIn breach, was LinkedIn breach, or did somebody just scrape a bunch of publicly available data and put it out there? But yet the headline said LinkedIn was breached, right? Mm. Most people didn't even read that. And they're like, oh,
clickbait.
LinkedIn sucks, man. They got breached, right? People that know nothing about security, even people that read that probably didn't even understand what that meant. And they were just like, oh, LinkedIn got breached. So there's information out there. How information is reported about actual breaches, you guys as practitioners know within typically 24 hours when something happens, reading it and talking to your peers, kind of what happened there. It's like, well, that was just bad practice, or well, this was left exposed, or some subordinate got upset, left the company and did something really, really bad. And the reason I go there is consumers who spend a lot of their time on social media are going to read the headlines, right? And believe that this is bad. So there is an impact to business. But in some cases, these businesses have great security protocols and have started to put privacy as something that's important. But yet something like that happens with publicly available data that's scraped, it just harms them and it's a slap in the face. It's almost like somebody is out to get them, maybe a competitor, right? But on the flip side, this dark web that I speak of, right? This dark side where information is readily available, right? On people, right? On consumers, on businesses. All the information about you that was considered P2 data, personal identification information that has been stolen from businesses goes up for sale if companies don't pay when they get ransomed or other things. And even then, sometimes that data becomes available in years to come through other means. And people buy that for pennies on the dollar, right? And all they're looking for is some type of password information, user information, right? Little key things that they can use, because let's be honest, consumers don't change their passwords as much as they should, right? And I know there's this argument, right? This dark web that we spoke of has all this available information, and people are going in and buying it. I thought the Uber breach was an interesting example of the individual that achieved this, right? Was not a mafia organization, an advanced persistent threat group overseas with a bunch of government funding. But what he did have was some very useful information that he was able to use and socially engineer somebody.
Right.
Yeah. Now, I guess I think this is a red herring topic. Going off, I mean, what you just said is all true things, but I don't think any of that has anything to do with the privacy component of what companies do, short of only collect what you need, keep what you need, and get rid of the rest. Other than that, if you minimize the amount of data that can be taken, all of that, unfortunately, none of those cases can be resolved by better data protection and by better data privacy practices inside companies. And I'm sure I will hear from listeners as to how I'm wrong about that. And please do let us know.
I was going to say
feedback at greatsecurity-debate.net.
I would disagree with you though, because I think if better privacy practices at company and a long enough time horizon actually does fix some of that issue. Yes, there's an acknowledgement, as you're talking about, Brian, on the dark web. All of our information is out there. Let's be honest, right? We came from an era of bad information security. Lots of data was stolen. It's out there. But in a long enough time horizon, we have the opportunity to correct that for future generations. I feel like I'm getting philosophical here, but if we correct it today, if we make the honest decision that privacy has to be at the core of everything we do today, then we are making decisions for down the road for those future generations and what's going to be available to the dark web. Not saying it's perfect, but
I'm kind of, Dan, not to team up on you, I'm kind of to the side of Erik here. And this goes back to like the Great Dust Bowl.
Wouldn't be a debate if we were all in agreement.
Like, I mean, there was a time period back then where people believed that when you went out and tilled your soil, the deeper you got, the better your next year was going to be for growing, right? And what they realized was you till all that soil as the winds come, right, and blow off some of the topsoil, the rain comes, blows that off. You're losing the really good nutrients and stuff that feeds the plants, right? All your data is being blown away. And what they realized was, if you don't till the soil that deep, if you're not taking this much data, let's say, and you're allowing those roots to go down, and then you dig down 2-3 years later, what you realize is those root bases for those plants that end up dying create little tunnels. And those little tunnels create areas for water and other nutrients to grow. So you don't need to retill, but they also hold the soil into place. There's a structure there. And I know people are probably, unless you're watching the video, you can't see my little hands make the
milking the cat
tunnels.
Yeah.
But I draw on that analogy because there was a belief in a time period where everybody believed you had to go this far, this deep. The deeper you did, the better off you are. And right now we're in the age of data. Everybody believes data is the new oil. So they're advocating for ways to gather more and more and more and more data. You have companies out there that are lobbying the government against certain privacy acts because the more data they have, the more valuable they believe they will be in the future.
Right.
But the point I was trying to make, though, is it is, while the end result of it is, as these things end up in the nefarious places, it's not directly because of the collection that the nefarious get at it. It's not like the companies are selling it to the bad guys. they're doing this for, and I'm going to use, for those of you on the audio,
in most cases, they're not
legitimate,
selling it
for
to them.
legitimate uses to to data brokers, to advertisers, to other things that are above board by current definitions. And it is then that the uses of those and the aggregation of all those become the treasure troves that people go after in order to become, and which will then later on. So there's trickle down that happens. But my argument is that the direct resale of my information does not get, I'm not reselling it to the dark web, to people who are, to the attackers who use it to mine me. They're going, but to be fair, they're also buying it straight from the legitimate brokers too, to get better intel. OPSEC is a very mature space, and there's all sorts of data sources to go to.
Technically, this goes back. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Brian. Go ahead.
I was going to say, this goes back to the 0-day trade, right? Like, how was the 0-day trade created? It was another form of brokers brokering, like literally like the nuclear warheads of cybersecurity. Anyhow, go ahead, Erik.
I was going to say, I'm going to play the semantics on you, Dan, though, that if we're using nefarious in the concept of just kind of a black and white, a binary, you're either a good company or you're a bad company. And if you're a bad company, or thinking about selling it to a hacker, which, the presence on the dark web, but let's go back to the Cambridge Analytica. You had Facebook selling it to a company that then arguably mass manipulated an election.
Agree, but that's
how is that any different?
That company would exist today if they were in the U.S. That company would exist today if they were in the U.S. The only reason Cambridge Analytica doesn't exist anymore is because they were in England.
But let's go back to terminology. That is not dark web. If I sell data to bad people, does that make me dark web? Just that. I just want to be clear about the words we're using. That's
fair enough.
Am I zero trust if I buy your product?
But Dan, where I was going with the whole dark web part is, if there's
I'm
enough,
still not sure where you're going with the dark web part.
So if there's enough availability of data out there on you today that makes it that valuable that a company like Cambridge Analytica can buy it, and then in the course of a 1-year period, make the needle move on an election one way or the other, that's pretty powerful. Now imagine the data in the dark web, right? But now imagine the data in the dark web that has been stolen from organizations, right? And is up for sale in the dark web. It's different than the publicly available data that companies are buying. Where I was going with that is, so as you say, you got to raise the bar, and I shouldn't say you said, but as you raise the bar of your security practice, of your privacy practice, the idea that that type of data can be stolen should become less and less, making less available data on the dark web, right? Which protects everybody. And most consumers out there don't really understand what the dark web is. To them, it's like space, right? It's like, oh, do you need a Hubble telescope to go look into the dark web, right?
But realize, computer. I think that's an oversimplification, because realize there are legitimate parts of everybody's business that we do that have nothing, if I'm a doctor's office, I'm going to collect health data. And this is actually a discussion I've been having with marketing teams recently, where it's really tough for them to understand, because they hear the things about rules and laws and data minimization, and their question is, just tell me what I need to change. And the answer isn't necessarily that you need to change anything.
You're saying
the answer is we need to talk about what it is you're doing, what it is we're collecting, what it is we're using, how we're using it, and how we're sharing it. And if in the course of that discussion we find places where it's not necessary, we should remove that. But realize that there people immediately jump to the definition of better privacy as don't do stuff. And that's not true. We as businesses have to do stuff. We do stuff because I'm a doctor. I will collect health data. I have to protect the bejesus out of it, but I still have to collect it. And I think if we give people this idea that we can not collect it, there's still going to be these troves, these places for people to get at the data. And so data privacy, unfortunately, the thing you just said takes the old school security mentality of just don't do it, and applies it to an area, data privacy, which has long been past that idea. They've been much more business focused for a very long time, that we don't always have to say no. They've been about how do we negotiate the right access, the right data, the right information in order to do the job. And I'd argue that we should reduce those numbers of things that we hold, because then when it does get compromised, and it's when, not if, it will have less impact, less broad things that weren't necessary. But we're not going to eliminate it just by being better data privacy citizens.
Totally agree with you. Yeah, my goal is not to turn it into a binary decision of collect, don't collect, right? Because so I'll use the same rationalization that as we go through a lot of our security frameworks, and I know we've all done this going through the different, that the whole concept is defensible position. That you need to be able to show that you actually thought through it, that you made an informed decision on why you're collecting it, what you needed for it. As long as you've gone through those steps, then that's fine. Because then the end result of going through that process says, all right, anything that we don't really need to fulfill the mission of the company and do what's right for the consumer, then we get rid of that. We don't need that data. And I'm fine with that. I think that's got to be the hybrid between them. I'm not advocating that, oh, don't collect any data. That's not realistic.
But that's the reaction we get from people when you start talking about privacy. They're like, oh, just tell me what I need to turn off. Or, okay, what do we need to stop doing? It's not necessarily that. It's this: know what you're doing, what you're collecting, doing, and sharing. Say what you're doing, give people choice, meaningful choice in it, and then follow that choice, which is where Sephora got into some trouble. And just for those that don't know, there's a link in the show notes about the specific case that that recently Sephora was fined by the state of California, 1.2 million, I think it was.
It was 1.2
million in what is the first fine coming out of the California Attorney General's office, which does enforcement for California's privacy law. And there was a couple of different components to it. One of which is that they didn't do what they didn't say what they were going to do. They didn't do what they said they were going to do. They didn't disclose the sale of personal information. They didn't abide by that. In California, you have a thing that says, do not sell my personal information. By the way, if you're interested, there's a whole other separate discussion about the definition of sell. Sell doesn't mean sell. Sell in California also means share, and give and view and all of these kinds of things. So take a look at that. It's as clear as it's not quite, it's way broader than you might think, which also makes for interesting discussions with those that are collecting and using data. But I'm not selling it. Yes, you are.
So
the other component, just one real quick, Brian. The other component was that they didn't adhere to what's called the global privacy control signals, which are things that browsers can send over. So you set it once and say, I don't want my stuff collected. And California law now, this is the clearest sign that California law has said it's important to abide by those. If you don't, have to honor it. Now you have to honor it. Now there's monetary reason why you need to honor it. And the third piece is they were given a month to respond and remedy it, which is required under the law, and they did not. So that's how we got here. This wasn't just a surprise thing. There's a couple of different components that come along to it.
So I'm offering another kind of somewhat rebuttal here. And this comes from our good friend, Martin Bailey, who shared a post that I thought was really, really funny. And he titled it, "Did they get a good deal?" And he was referring to Morgan Stanley hard drives being sold, holding sensitive client data. So again, this goes back. You could have all the great security controls in place, but the guy who takes the garbage out decides, I'm not going to go ahead and scrape off the plates into the garbage can that go into the recycling. I'm just going to throw them all inside the dishwasher, and the thing gets clogged up, then somebody else can clean it out. And lo and behold, they got all this additional food and everything else. This data was sitting on computers that were supposed to be scrapped. That data should have been destroyed, right? And it's how you handle data. Right. So in this case, they weren't selling it. This isn't the dark web, but guess what? I guarantee a lot of this data ends up on the dark web. Why?
Yeah.
So because when people realize the gold that they have, they're gonna get it, and they're gonna.
So how would my better privacy policy, Brian? How would my improved collect less privacy policy?
It wouldn't have affected this.
Helped make this not happen.
but this
And I'm
isn't
being
necessarily on
particularly
privacy.
pedantic for the sake of the argument, but
But this goes back to something you said earlier, Dan, is the data that you need, you hold on to. The data you don't, you get rid of, right? At what point is too long to hold data, right? When you look at how old these things
no
were.
longer need it.
When do you no longer need it, right? And if there's tax purposes, right? And this goes into like, if you look at even the mortgage industry, right? They actually have to hold on, like as they're doing loans. The paper part of it from a brokerage standpoint actually has to help, like the paper file has to be held on for like 30 days until that file is turned over and bought by whatever company is going to handle that mortgage. And then it has to be held on a little bit longer and then destroyed. So you got file rooms filled with paper data for like 30 plus days, which I thought was really, really, really interesting. And in this case, I mean, a lot of this data was very, very, very old. So at what point is, well, I was going to say enough, is time, like the time value has expired. We can now get rid of this data.
You've entered into one of the most difficult discussions in the world, which is when do I need to stop hoarding the data and count on the aggregate and give up on the fact that or just let go of the fact that I might need the raw source data again. This is the most complicated discussion you ever have inside an organization. When can you aggregate it? 30 days, but I might need to go back. It's like an episode of Hoarders. Why do I need the New York Times from January 3rd, 1902? I don't, but I might want to look up that article.
You scared me there, Dan, because I was like, you said the word hoarders and I was going to drop a note. Like, I feel the same way about this table and chairs in my attic. It's been there for like 10 years, but one day we're going to do something amazing with it. Then you said hoarder. And I was like, do you have extra data points on me somewhere, Dan?
I do actually. I bought them not on the dark web, but I just bought them from Equifax.
So as you switched over to, switch over, Brian, to the Morgan Stanley case, I actually had the article in front of me. So for those listening, just to kind of give the background onto that. So the SEC fined them $35 million, $35 million. So it's it's one of the bigger fines that we've seen.
Although unfortunately for Morgan Stanley, that's probably.
Yeah, well, it's a rounding error. But so roughly 15 million customers were affected. I think, so they're speculating right now that, so what it was a moving company that was not, how to put this?
They did their disposal
they're not
to a company that wasn't a legitimate disposal company. It was just a moving company.
Yeah, they're not an experienced data destruction company, and the drives themselves were not encrypted. So it was roughly about 42 servers. So in this case, I would say that the SEC, and now I haven't looked at the exact verbiage they came out with, but this would be equivalent to gross negligence. Because as we think about data destruction, this is not a new control for any of us. You look at any of the prominent frameworks, if we're talking NIST,
NIST 888 is really clear on this.
Any of those, yes. This is a common practice that you pull those drives and those certified destruction, CYA, make sure that you've got it in writing that they've been destroyed.
No,
Eric,
they destroy them. They don't cover your ass. They actually destroy them.
Well, no, the documentation behind it.
Oh, right. Guys, in one quote, the director of SEC's enforcement division said, failures in this case are astonishing. If not properly safeguarded, this sensitive information can end up in the wrong hands and have disastrous consequences for investors. Unquote.
Based on Brian's reading of that, I'm thinking that we're going to have a whole new segment here on Brian reading security stories. The tone, the inflection, I love it. You'd be a great.
We could sell it to Headspace as a way to calm people at the end of the day.
Brian, if I could get you to read the books I'm listening to on Audible, that'd be great.
I want to meditate to Brian reading security stories, and ending each one with the copyrighted SportsCenter song.
So actually, I want to go back to way earlier in the conversation, something you brought up, Dan, that you were talking about security and kind of how it plays into ESG. And I've always taken a liking to Jamie Dimon. Now, granted, as we talk about JP Morgan Chase and being in the financial, it elicits a lot of different emotions on how you look at that vertical. But nonetheless, one of the things that I always liked about Jamie Dimon is with the Business Roundtable, he came out years ago and they pushed the whole notion that companies should first be beholden to society and the things that they're doing. They now have taken it to another level on their website that around ESG, that the social pillar, saying that cybersecurity is a key metric under that social pillar. I can talk. I think this is a huge move, and it's the correct one, not just because of a security practitioner, but looking at cybersecurity as a core tenet, having to be part of an organization and being a core pillar of ESG.
I have no debate to that. I mean, there's nothing to debate. There's nothing to debate. Security is about making sure you do the right things. You have the right access to the information. You make it available when it's necessary, and you make sure that it's unchanged. That's, I don't know how people debate that, other than I don't want to spend the cost on it.
One of the key points that Jamie Dimon made was, quote, "The biggest vulnerability for the financial system is the threat of cyber attacks," unquote. Dun-dun-dun, dun-dun-dun.
Yeah, well, again, and I was kind of waiting for a Brian Automotive reference in the, do we make a warranty claim or recall or not? That's really the decision when it comes to security, isn't it?
Well, it's funny. I was actually going near the beginning of this conversation when we sat down like 3 years ago and had this talk at the Detroit City Distillery. When we were sitting there, one of the things I said reaching across the table was, automotive companies are going to be judged in the next 3 to 5 years on what they decide to do with data and how they do it, right? With all the data that's going to be coming from vehicles. And they've had a front row seat watching all these other businesses aggregate data, whether it's banking systems, whether it's, just the ad tech systems in general. All these other businesses try to monetize the data and data points that they bring in from their consumers. The automotive companies having a front row seat at that are now literally going to have the front row seat, because those drivers and those decisions that are made, where you go, how you go, are going to help make the vehicle better and safer in the future. At the same time, there's going to be monetization around that information, around the people that own the vehicles, where you go in the vehicles. I could think of 70,000 plus data points on already what's taken today, because now you're actually searching things from your vehicle. Maybe if you're in a level 4 or level 5 autonomous vehicle and sitting in the back, if you're doing ride sharing, there's so many things that come from that in the future of automotive. And I really do believe that you will be judged on what you do with that data and how you do it. So going back to privacy and everything else, you're right, Dan. The comment that I made about even on the JP Morgan Chase side there, when I was putting that up there, like, it's having great privacy rules, right? Or a great privacy stance internally wouldn't have kept that from happening. And maybe it should have, because that was people's data and you hire the right company to dispose of it and you didn't. But just think of how trivial that is, Eric. Like, you could have some of the best security teams, biggest SOC, et cetera. And then your purchasing team is like, well, we sent it out for bid for destruction and 4 companies came back and we gave it to this one because it was the lowest bid. But lo and behold, they've never done this before. Well, right? It's like
the argument in that case, there should have been a mitigating control. Data at rest on that, in that magnitude, should have been encrypted at rest. And if it would have been encrypted at rest, this would have been a non-story, because it would have been non-recoverable on those drives. Now, arguments could be made on certain companies that have the capabilities to be able to decrypt some of that information, but nonetheless, that control should have been in place.
So I'm going to put out a trigger warning, because I am going to talk about automotive for a second, and this may not end well. So I want to go back though to the data collection inside of cars, and actually I want to talk about data collection in everything. We've created our own bed here. Let's talk about the illegitimate. Now, let me rewind. We have an opportunity with cars, with automotives, with autonomous, and the massive data collection that's happening. It's being done originally for the right reasons. You're collecting information about car to car, what's happening, where you're going, so that you can start to create a much more automated and safe set of environments. That would have been great. Collect all of that information, protect it, collect it. Don't sell it. We've taken what is good and this is not just automotive, but it's one case where my argument would be we should collect all this stuff. But we should also say, damn it, don't sell it. Or let me decide what of it gets sold to other places,
All right.
me, the user. We're actually kneecapping innovation because we're damn greedy.
Well, let me ask you this, though. If you were to anonymize the data, is it then okay to sell
No
it?
such thing. Unless you aggregate it to the point where any quant will say this is way too aggregated, I don't trust it. Then at that point, that's the point in which it truly becomes hard to unravel. It is nearly impossible to truly anonymize data. And there is enough data out there about people that you can track, that you can use enough data points to be able to triangulate back. I mean, this goes back to, it was a small number of Netflix points and data points from Netflix, and you could determine who the person was. And that remains true today, and even more so.
So I just know from my time that I spent on the ADAS teams working in automotive that one of the things that a lot of the tech companies were so excited about was the ability to advertise to the people in the vehicle, whether it was the robo taxis, whether it was level 4 or level 5 autonomous vehicles and someone's working in the back. Because you know where they're going, you know the things they like. You could tell them about a new restaurant that's opening right up here up the corner because you know this guy really likes Thai food and he likes it spicy, and these guys bring in some really cool peppers, right? Like there's just so many ways that they were looking at how you could advertise to the person. That data, and even the auto companies were saying, like, all these tech companies, Google, Apple, everybody wanted to get in on making a vehicle, and they had all these secret projects. I know this only because they were reaching out to the suppliers, because the end of the day, automotive companies don't build vehicles, everyone, they assemble them. And it takes hundreds and hundreds of suppliers to build those vehicles. Ask Erik Willie over at American Axle. He would know that very well. So at the end of the day, these tech companies decided after years of investigation that, oh my gosh, the capital investment is that, and you make less than 5% on a vehicle. Our investors and board are going to freak out because we currently make over 200% on all you guys, right? And then
these
we push
are
you
rule
guys
of
into
70
long-term
companies that are these are rule of 70 companies that are used to huge margins.
Oh yeah, like, well, the automotive companies sell 5-year leases. That's because the vehicle costs $50,000. Well, we should do the same. We're going to get you into a 5-year contract and make you stick to a certain pay every single year and push these contracts longer and longer. Guys, it's different, right? And that's why they all backed out of trying to build a vehicle. But at the end of the day, they all wanted in because the data that would come from that vehicle is so powerful. So Dan, to your point, it'd be great if you could say, well, don't use the data for good. Use the data to help solve warranty issues, to increase the quality of the parts, how far a vehicle will go. It will get better. But at the end of the day, everybody knows that vehicle is like, it reminds me of a book that Erik and I just read talking about in Ecuador, the oil reserves that were down there. It was going to change the world. People are looking at the autos as like, there is an untapped oil reserve and we all want in. Please, if you're going to auction it off, we'll show up and we'll buy, right? Like that data.
As a byproduct of this. So you said that they all want to advertise to me. You know what? Why doesn't anybody ask me if I want to be advertised to first? An example of this, I don't want ads in my things. I will pay more to not have ads. I just rage quit the Athletic. This is the phenomenal sports reporting website with really great long form content. And it was built, and I paid my annual subscription on the premise that it was ad-free, uninterrupted. I got an entire article I could read all the way through, nothing interrupted it, and that's what I loved. New York Times has since bought The Athletic, and lo and behold, a few weeks ago, ads start showing up in the reading form. It's interrupting my reading. I bought based on one particular thing. And unfortunately, when I submitted my, I would like a refund or find a way to get out of ads, the answer was, we only use legitimate, wonderful advertisers, and we carefully select them. That's not my point. I don't want ads. I don't want to see ads. Sorry, right. Too bad. So sad. And by the way, we won't refund you. But I argue that consumers want more well, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong in this because the race to the bottom on HBO Max and other things, Netflix, how are they building up their numbers, making it cheaper and adding in ads? And I mean, maybe I'm alone in this.
So look at Amazon. Okay. On Amazon Prime Thursday Night Football. I was just reading an article on this, that it was a huge successful night for Amazon Prime. They waited X amount of years before they did this Thursday Night Football. They promised all the advertisers that they would hit 15 or 14.5 million people. It hit 15 million people. And then if they add in like whatever it was they did beforehand, I don't have the article here in front of me. It was like 18 million. They're like, so this was a huge success. And the fact that the game against Kansas City and LA was as close as it was up until the end, they held viewership longer than any other Thursday night football game in like the last 3 years or something like that. But it was like Thursday night, second game or third game of the season was the stat, right? And I was like, that's a really interesting stat, but it was a huge success for them based on that. Now, Dan, on the flip side of that, what would happen to all the marketing groups within all these security vendors if you were able to opt out of them reaching out to you? I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of people.
I'd gladly put $20 into that benevolence fund.
Erik stands mute with a huge smile on his face. If you're watching the video,
you know what? I would be able to plug my phone in again. And not have to use an alternate email for communications I want to have. I mean, there's all sorts of benefits.
It's amazing. Like when we talk about data and the data that's available, and all these tech companies and security companies that are really good at using data are also using that data to become better and better marketers, right? It's like, they're 50%, security company, 50% marketing company.
I mean, looking at this from a marketing standpoint, I mean, the conversation around advertisements, should they be there? Should they not be there? I think this is where we need to take one of the lessons from marketing, that we are not the average consumer, that we don't tend to see, at least I haven't seen anything of any mass pushback from consumers that we're tired of the ad space. We're tired of people seem to go along with it. I think there's a viewpoint that we share as practitioners, as caring about privacy, caring about these elements that we do care about
my time. The heck with the rest of it. I care about my time.
But I don't think that's the norm across the board, right? I look at a lot of people that don't sign up for, YouTube Red. I'm getting rid of, or that's at least what
the premium.
It was
Red. Yeah. Best $11 a month you can ever spend.
Oh, I agree. And I've still spend that money today because I don't want the ads. But then I watch a ton of other people that are fine. They'll sit through the ads, they'll do something else, come back to the video, and it doesn't seem to faze them.
I wonder if they did even after last week's test by Google to put 10 unskippable pre-roll ads in. And there was this huge outcry. I think that Google's like testing their limits. I'll put the link in the show notes and I'll send it to you guys. But there was like 10 or there was like 6 minutes worth of crap, and it was unskippable. And that was what seemed to have broken people.
Going back though on Erik, what you were just saying, or Dan, Erik, were you saying that people have they're not really worried about the ads and everything else, that they kind of like it, right? But these same people, and I'm making a generalized statement here. Okay. This isn't information publicly available, analytics, some security company or tech company.
No real sources, you mean?
Zero real sources besides Brian Schneebly.
May not actually be legitimate. Yeah.
For all of our listeners here on Saturday morning, I want to bring
Did you just write a blog and then quote yourself in the blog as using
that
is
modern media?
Guys, I'm inviting Brian Schneebly here real quick. And what I want to tell you guys about is the fact that there are a large number of consumers out there that truly believe their Amazon Alexa is listening to them full time. And that's why it knows what they want to do when they do it. There are a number of people, and I don't want to quote somebody that I can't quote because he hasn't quoted himself yet, but the average consumer probably doesn't understand all the signal intelligence being gathered from his phone or the sites he visits on a daily basis, or that he leaves open on his phone with 39 pages open, tracking where he's going at all times. that information is more valuable than the fact that you still believe that your Amazon Alexa inside your house is listening to you, even though you're outside your house trying to have a conversation now, because you don't trust your Alexa, but you still love it because it can play your music when you're cooking dinner for your family. These people, these consumers that I talk about, really don't have an understanding of how the tech is gathering their information. Now, even though this information, Dan, might not be the really sensitive private stuff that privacy laws are protecting, it's still a large amount of information about you. And that information is then used, monetized to advertise back to you. At some point, though, all this data collecting about you, just imagine if airline companies, right? If the mafias of the day that are referred to as the advanced persistent threat groups, if the old mafias of the day were able to have a way in to look at airline data to know when you're traveling, but actually when you're traveling with your entire family, they don't need Facebook anymore.
No, they just go on Twitter and say, when did I post? I'm leaving my house empty, as Erik said earlier.
Exactly. So anyhow, I throw it out there because most people don't understand, like when you tell them that there's 70,000 plus signals, right? Just coming from this one, I won't say what it is, right? That's gathering on you, or when you go to a website, the signal intelligence and what those signals are, your location, you name it, right? All that information that's being gathered is really, really powerful. And there's companies out there that's what they specialize in, being able to aggregate data down into analytics about you, because that is valuable. That same information, though, is also valuable in threat actors' hands, right? Not just advertisers' hands.
We want to talk about data minimization, though. If we were to eliminate advertising, we'd eliminate the root cause for much of the collection of that data, wouldn't we?
That is very true, because that's the value of it.
We've solved the privacy problem. Just get rid of all advertising.
Yeah,
advertising.
It's completely different than the automotive perspective, that if you're able to gather data, you could actually help avoid warranty issues, improve braking systems, etc.
But you can also sell it to Domino's so they know where to put up a new restaurant.
100%. So that's the flip side of it, right? Like,
we love you, Domino's,
the companies today that are. So anyhow, I really enjoyed this conversation. I enjoyed the fact that there was great debate back and forth. At one point, for those that are viewing, Dan almost made me cry. I mean, he got really strong there. Erik came to my rescue. Much appreciated, buddy. And there's so many, and I think another avenue of this conversation then for maybe the next debate goes to the insurance side of it. So one of the things we were talking about earlier, where insurance companies are now doing the investigation part, where companies are saying, and this goes for like when the opt-in, opt-out, et cetera, companies are saying, hey, I need insurance. Yeah, I do this. You're self-assuring, you're doing the risk assessment yourself and saying, yeah, that sounds about right. And now you have insurance companies coming in to say, no, you self-assessed yourself, and this wasn't true, and this wasn't true. And now, sorry, your policy is debunked. We're not paying, right? So this goes back to an even further set of conversations we had. I think this was a handful of months ago, around the aspect that insurance companies might be the thing that raises the bar when it comes to risk avoidance and what people put in place and how they build their teams. But I also think insurance could start to drive the privacy side of it too. So sorry, I wasn't going down the insurance thing. I was trying to loop it back together.
No, it's as though you knew. I was having a similar discussion yesterday as I'm prepping for a panel that I'm going to be on exactly that topic, around insurance and security and privacy and how they're all tying together, coming up in early October. I'll put a link in the show notes when we have the actual date and time. Yeah. But then we can bring that into an episode. How about that? I
was going to say, invoking insurance elicits a lot of emotions, at least between Dan and I, and it's raising the bar in whose favor.
I'm just going to go in the couch and dig out that money and say that's my insurance reserve, because it's going to be a little more effective than some of the ways some of these things are trending. See what you did, Brian. You ended the episode and you got us all riled up for the next one. No, thank you guys. As always, a great discussion and great debate. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Erik.
And thanks to you, the listener, for being here. We really appreciate you. It's been great now that we're getting to go back out to get to hear from people who are listening. And I got to meet a bunch of people at the Rocky Mountain Information Security Conference this week and hear about people that are listening. So if you're listening, reach out. We'd love to hear from you. Feedback at greatsecurity.debate.net. You can find our website, a lot of information and all our past episodes on our website, www.greatsecurity.debate.net. You can find us in YouTube, the video version, in which you can see Brian break down in tears and Erik save him, come to his rescue and save him from the big bad Dan. You can find us on YouTube by searching Great Security Debate, and you can find us on your favorite podcast application by, again, searching for the Great Security Debate. We look forward to seeing you again soon on the next Great Security Debate.